Today we are going to continue to work with hyperbolas. We're going to work on getting them out of standard form, finding those transformations with them, and figuring out where the key features fall once they've been moved left and right. Okay, it's going to require us to complete squares again to find the transformations and use those with points that are unaltered to alter them. So first step of that, let's group our x's and our y stuff together. So we have 2y squared, and we'll move the 4y with it. And we've got minus 3x squared, and we've got plus 12x with that. And we'll move that 8 to the other side. It's going to become negative. Now, kind of a word of caution here. With this, we want to determine which way it opens, on the x or on the y, so we can figure out whether the values we find are going to be x values or y values for the foci and vertice points. Don't make that determination until you get all the way done with completing the square. Because right now we would say, hey, the x is negative, the y is positive. It looks like it's going to open on the y-axis. But that could change because, remember, we need to make this equal to 1. And if this number is still negative when we get done at the end, when we go to divide, it's going to change the signs of everything. So make sure that you complete the square all the way before you make that determination. So let's go ahead and complete the square. So we're going to factor out that 2. We're going to get y squared minus 2y. This is where we want to draw the box with the extra box and factor. So y squared goes here. We're going to split this in half, so we get negative 1y and negative 1y. And negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. And to counterbalance that positive 1 that we need there to make this factor, we need this one to be negative. So this will factor into minus 1 and a y, and minus 1. It's the same thing, which is what we wanted. So when we do this, we're going to get 2. Don't forget about the 2 we factored out, times y minus 1 times y minus 1, which is y minus 1 squared. And don't forget about that balancing factor, that negative 1, get it inside those big brackets. Now we're going to factor the 3 out of this thing, and it's negative here. We're factoring a negative 3 out. So that's x squared, and that's going to change the sign of this. That's going to be minus 4x here. Box with the extra box to factor this. And let's see, we're going to put the x squared here. Split that negative 4 in half, gives us negative 2x. And negative 2x, and negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, which means I need to balance that with a negative 4. This is going to factor into x minus 2, x minus 2. Now we'll go to our answer. Don't forget about that negative 3 we factored out. And we're going to get x minus 2 times x minus 2, which is where we get the x minus 2 squared, and our minus 4. And all of this is still equal to negative 8. So now we need to distribute and clean this thing up and get it equal to 1. So we're going to multiply that 2 back out. We get 2y minus 1 squared minus 2. Distribute the negative 3. So that's negative 3 times x minus 2 squared. And negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. And that's going to be negative 8. So now we need to move these constants here, the positive 12 and the negative 2 to the other side, and then divide whatever we have left over here back to the other side. So we're going to minus that 12. That'll give us negative 20. I'm going to add that 2. So that means that's going to be negative 18. And that's what our 2y minus 1 squared minus 3x minus 2 squared is equal to. And we can see the transformations right here. We know that the x is going to move 2 to the right, the y is going to move 1 up. But before we can figure out the a and the b and stuff, we need to get this equal to 1, which means we need to take all of this and divide it by negative 18. So 2 divided by negative 18 is going to give me negative y minus 1 squared over 9. Negative 3 divided by negative 18 is a positive 6. y minus 2 squared on the top, and now we're equal to 1. But notice what happened here. Because this number was negative, it switched the signs of these things, which will affect the graph, because that means this thing is now going to open on the x-axis, not the y, because the x is the positive fraction. So we get x minus 2 squared over 6 minus y minus 1 squared over 9, and that's all equal to 1. So that means this is going to open on the x-axis, meaning that all these a, b, and c values we'll find will be associated, I'm sorry, the a and the c value that we find for the focus and the vertices will be x values when we first find them. So a squared is always with the positive, b squared with the negative. So if a squared is 6, a has to be the square root of 6. B squared is 9, b has to be 3, and c, well, c squared is a squared plus b squared, which is 15. So that means that c is going to be the square root of 15, and nothing special factors out of those things. So those are what we're going to be used to find the points originally, and then the transformations with this. Well, this negative 2 with the x is going to tell us that this goes right by 2 units, and the negative 1 with the y means that this is going to go up by 2, I'm sorry, not by 2, but by 1. And we'll have to apply these things after we find the points without them. So, focus, vertice, and 2 asymptotes here. So when we go through and we find the focus, now remember we said this opens on the x-axis, so these values are going to be on the x. So that means the y for them is going to be 0. So focus is part of the a, so this is going to be plus or minus the square root of 6. Vertices, same thing's going to happen here. I apologize, I put those in the wrong one. This should not have been a. This should have been C. This is the focus. Let's change that up. Focus is C, which is 15. This is plus or minus the square root of 15. Down here for our vertices, this is based off A. This is plus or minus the square root of 6. Now our asymptotes, y plus or minus that fraction times x. So when we do this, okay, our fraction here, we got to take whatever y is and divide it by whatever x is. So y had the 3 with it, so let's put this fraction over here. So it's 3 over the square root of 6. Now we've got to rationalize that thing. We get square root of 6, square root of 6, so we get 3 root 6 over 6. Those have a common factor, so this is the square root of 6 over 2. So this slope is the square root of 6 over 2. Not going to be anything really nice to graph, but if we want to find its equation, we've done that. Now we need to apply our transformations to this thing. So all the x's are going to have 2 added to them. So we get plus or minus the square root of 15 plus 2. We get plus or minus the square root of 6 plus 2. All the y's are going to go up by 1, so they're going to get 1 added to them, so that's 1, and that's 1, because those were just 0. Now with this, we've got to talk about this point, okay? Because really there's a point in here, 0, 0. We got to figure out where it moved to. Now this graph moved right and up, meaning that there's zeros added to these things, and we want to figure out what the numbers need to be in here to put this in the right spot. So let me get the stuff we know listed in here. So if we move right by 2, this one should be plus 2. If we move up, this one should be plus 1. That's where that point moved. I apologize, I listed them as plus. They should have been minus because they're both backwards. And there we go. So really focus and vertices. Asymptotes are really tough, and we'll spend more time with that. I'll do a couple more focuses that are a little bit shorter, okay? Now, one of the things as we complete this that really, what we really need to practice with, given some equations like this, I want to identify which conic section this is, okay? So when we go through and we list these, we talk about what makes a parabola, what makes a ellipse an ellipse, and what makes a hyperbola. What are the identifying features in the equation? So with a parabola, only x squared or y squared, not both of them. When you have an ellipse, you're going to have x squared and a y squared, and they're both going to be positive. Down here, we're going to have x squared and a y squared, but one is negative. So when we look at this first setup, we have x squared equals y squared plus 1. We know that can't be a parabola. We know that's not a parabola because it has an x squared and a y squared. So now we need to look, well, it has both of these. How do we figure out if both of them are positive or just one of them is negative? Well, before we can make this determination, we need to take these things and put them on the same side. X squared minus y squared equals 1. That means that this, just from right here, this has to be a hyperbola. X squared over 1 minus y squared over 1 equals 1. That's your a squared, that's your b squared, and we could find all the points from that. So this one is a hyperbola. What about the second one? Even we look at this, we've got x squared equals 4y minus 2y squared. Now, right at the beginning of this, we see an x squared and a negative y squared. We would say, wait, that's got to be a hyperbola because one of them's positive, one of them's negative. But the same thing that we had up here happens again. We've got to get these things, the x's and the y's, on the same side. So we have x squared, and I move this negative 2y squared over, it becomes positive. This becomes negative, and this is equal to 0 right now, which isn't necessarily how I want it to find all the points, but because x squared and y squared are positive, we're on the same side, I know that this has to be an ellipse. Now we would complete the square and go through and we could find the points from there, which we'll practice with that a little bit later. But identifying which conic section you have based on its standard equation is one of the goals that we have to accomplish. And we don't actually need to go through the whole process of finding the points just to determine which one of these conics it is. So some things to remember there. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye, guys.